The crystal chandeliers sparkled like diamonds above the crowd of wealthy guests. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, the kind that cost more than most people earn in a year. The women wore gowns that shimmered with every step, and the men stood tall in perfectly tailored suits. This was the annual charity gala at the Westmont estate, and it was the kind of event where being invited meant you had truly made it in life. Richard Westmont stood near the marble staircase, a glass of expensive wine in his hand. He owned one of the biggest tech companies in the country, and his mansion reflected every bit of his success. The floors were so polished you could see your reflection in them. Paintings worth millions hung on the walls like they were nothing special, and in the center of the grand hall sat a beautiful black piano, positioned perfectly under a spotlight as if waiting for someone worthy to play it. Richard loved these parties. Not because he cared about charity, though he made sure everyone thought he did. He loved them because they gave him a chance to show off, to remind everyone who had the money, who had the power, and who controlled the room. He thrived on it. The attention, the admiration, the way people laughed a little too hard at his jokes and agreed with everything he said. Tonight was going perfectly. The guests were impressed, the food was exquisite, and the donations were pouring in. Richard was in his element, moving from group to group, telling stories about his latest business deals and dropping names of famous people he claimed as friends. His wife Catherine stood nearby, smiling politely but with tired eyes that had seen this performance 1,000 times before. Moving quietly through the crowd was Elena. She wore a simple black uniform with a white apron, carrying a silver tray filled with champagne glasses. At 28 years old, she had been working at the mansion for 2 years now. She knew how to be invisible in a room full of people who barely noticed her. She would slip between conversations, refill a glass here, clear a plate there, and disappear again like a shadow. But Elena wasn't just any maid. Behind those quiet eyes was a story that nobody in this mansion knew. A story of dreams that once burned so bright they seemed unstoppable. Of stages and spotlights that were meant for her. Of music that lived in her soul like breathing. But life has a way of changing everything when you least expect it. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her eyes down, her movements efficient. She had learned long ago not to make eye contact with the guests. They didn't want to see her as a person. They wanted their glasses full and their plates clean, and anything beyond that made them uncomfortable. So she played her part, just as they played theirs. Richard was in the middle of telling a group of investors about his new yacht when he noticed Elena passing by the piano. Something about the moment sparked an idea in his mind, a terrible idea, the kind that men like Richard have when they want to entertain themselves at someone else's expense. "You there?" he called out, his voice cutting through the gentle hum of conversation. "Yes, you with the tray." Elena stopped, her heart sinking. She turned slowly to face him, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, sir?" The conversations around them began to quiet down. People sensed something was about to happen, and they turned to watch. Richard walked toward her with that confident swagger that rich men wear like a second skin. He gestured grandly toward the piano. "Tell me, do you know anything about this magnificent instrument?" he asked, his tone dripping with fake curiosity. A few of his friends were already smiling, sensing where this was going. Elena swallowed hard. "A little, sir," she replied quietly. "A little." Richard laughed, turning to his audience. "Did you hear that, everyone? She knows a little about the piano." The guests chuckled politely, though some shifted uncomfortably. They knew Richard well enough to know he was setting something up. "Well then," Richard continued, his smile widening, "why don't you play something for us? We'd all love to hear what you can do." The room fell silent. Elena felt her face growing hot. She could feel dozens of eyes on her now, studying her, waiting to see what she would do. This was exactly what Richard wanted. To put her on the spot, to watch her fumble and embarrass herself, to remind everyone in the room about the natural order of things. "Sir, I really should get back to work," Elena said softly, trying to find a way out. "Nonsense," Richard waved his hand dismissively. "The work can wait. Come now, don't be shy. It's all in good fun. Just play us a simple little tune. Surely even someone with your background can manage that." The word stung, the way he said it, the way he smiled. Catherine touched her husband's arm gently. "Richard, maybe we should—" "Catherine, please," he interrupted, not even looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Elena, enjoying her discomfort like it was fine wine. I'm simply giving this young woman a chance to showcase her talents. Isn't that generous of me? Some of the guests looked away, embarrassed for Elena. Others watched with curiosity. A few of Richard's closer friends were grinning, waiting for the show. They had seen him do this before, picking out someone he considered beneath him and making them squirm for entertainment. Elena stood frozen, her tray growing heavy in her hands. Every instinct told her to run, to excuse herself and disappear into the kitchen where she belonged in their eyes. But something else was stirring inside her. Something that had been sleeping for a long time, a part of her she had buried under years of grief and survival and endless, exhausting work. She thought about her mother, about the hospital bills, about dropping out of school and leaving everything behind, about the piano she used to play for hours until her fingers ached, about the dreams that had turned to dust, and suddenly, standing there in front of all these people who looked at her like she was nothing, something inside her woke up. "Where should I put this?" Elena asked quietly, gesturing to her tray. Richard's smile grew even wider. "Just set it down anywhere, my dear. Take your time." Elena walked slowly to a nearby table and set down the tray. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like fire and ice running through her veins at the same time. She walked toward the piano, each step feeling like it carried the weight of everything she had lost and everything she had been forced to become. The guests parted to let her through. Some whispered to each other. What was about to happen? Would she even know how to play? This was going to be awkward to watch. Poor girl. Why was Richard being so cruel? But nobody stepped in to stop it. They just watched. Elena reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking down at the keys. How long had it been? 2 years, 3? It felt like a lifetime. She pulled out the bench, the legs scraping softly against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. She sat down slowly, adjusting her position, her fingers hovering over the keys like they were greeting an old friend they thought they'd never see again. Richard stood back with his arms crossed, that smug look still plastered on his face. He was already imagining how he would tell this story later. How he had asked the maid to play piano and she had made a fool of herself. How everyone had laughed. How it had been the highlight of the evening, but he had no idea what was about to happen. None of them did. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And then her fingers touched the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the silence like a bell. Then another. And another. Within seconds, something extraordinary began to happen in that grand hall. The melody that poured from Elena's fingers wasn't some simple tune or basic song that anyone could play. This was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most difficult and emotionally powerful pieces ever written. Her fingers moved across the keys with stunning speed and precision. The music swelled and dipped, thundered and whispered. It was like watching someone speak a language they had been forbidden to use for years, and now the words were pouring out in a flood of emotion that couldn't be stopped. The guests stood frozen. The smiles disappeared from their faces. The champagne glasses hung forgotten in their hands. Even Richard's smug expression began to crack as he realized something was very, very wrong with his little joke. This wasn't a maid fumbling through a simple melody. This was a master at work. Elena's eyes remained closed, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. Every note carried pain and hope and loss and love. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying gently, her fingers dancing across the keys like they had been born to do exactly this and nothing else. She wasn't in the mansion anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the music took her. She remembered her first piano lesson at age 5. The way her mother had saved every penny to afford that old upright piano in their tiny apartment. How her teacher had called her a natural, a prodigy, someone special. She remembered winning her first competition at age 8. Her mother crying tears of joy in the audience. She remembered the acceptance letter to Juilliard, the scholarship that would change everything, the future that stretched out before her like a golden road. And she remembered the phone call that ended it all. Her mother's weak voice on the other end of the line. The diagnosis. The impossible medical bills. The choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Leave school or let her mother die without the treatment she needed. All of that pain, all of that sacrifice, all of those lost dreams poured through her fingers into the keys. The music grew more intense, more passionate. It filled every corner of the mansion, echoing off the high ceilings, wrapping around everyone in the room like an invisible force. A woman in a designer gown wiped tears from her eyes. A man in an expensive suit stood with his mouth open, his hand pressed against his chest. Several guests had pulled out their phones, recording this impossible moment. Some were live streaming it, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Richard's face had gone from smug to shocked to something that looked almost like fear. His wife, Catherine, was crying openly, her hand covering her mouth. She had never seen anything like this. None of them had. The music built toward the crescendo, Elena's hands flying across the keys with breathtaking skill. Her fingers seemed to blur with movement. The sound was so powerful, so full of raw emotion that it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. This wasn't just technical perfection. This was someone pouring their entire soul into every single note. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, fading slowly into silence. Elena's hands remained on the keys, trembling. Her chest heaved with emotion and exhaustion. She kept her eyes closed for a long moment, not ready to face whatever came next. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was like the whole world had stopped turning. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room exploded into thunderous applause. People weren't just clapping politely like they did at fancy parties. They were applauding like they had just witnessed something miraculous. Because they had. Guests rushed toward the piano, surrounding Elena with questions and exclamations. Who was she? Where did she learn to play like that? How is this possible? Elena opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the crowd pressing around her. She looked overwhelmed, almost frightened by the sudden attention. Step back, please. Give her some air. An elderly woman's voice cut through the chaos. The crowd parted slightly as an older lady in an elegant silver gown made her way to the piano. She was crying, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. But she didn't seem to care. This was Mrs. Chen, a famous patron of the arts and former board member at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She had spent 50 years of her life surrounded by talented musicians. She knew brilliance when she heard it. My dear child, Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking with emotion. That was extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. She peered closely at Elena's face, studying her features. Wait, I know that style. That technique. Are you Elena Martinez? Elena's eyes widened in surprise. She nodded slowly, barely able to speak. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Chen gasped and grabbed Elena's hands. I knew it. I saw you play when you were 16. The International Chopin competition in Warsaw. You were magnificent. I never forgot it. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising with excitement. Do you know who this young woman is? This is Elena Martinez. She was a child prodigy. She won major competitions. She was studying at Juilliard on a full scholarship. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. A famous guest pulled up Elena's old competition videos on his phone, showing them to the people around him. Within minutes, everyone in the room was searching for her name online, finding articles about the brilliant young pianist who had mysteriously disappeared from the music world years ago. But what happened? Someone called out. Why are you working as a maid? The question hung in the air. Elena's face crumbled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked down at her uniform, at her worn hands that spent more time scrubbing floors than playing pianos these days. The shame and pain of the past few years came rushing back. My mother got sick, Elena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But in the hushed room, everyone heard her. Cancer. She didn't have insurance. No papers. I had to leave school to work, to pay for her treatment. I sent every dollar home. Every single one. Did she? Mrs. Chen couldn't finish the question. Elena shook her head, more tears falling. She passed away 2 years ago. I tried to go back to music after, but too much time had passed. I couldn't afford to return to school. My student visa expired. I had legal issues to sort out. And honestly, I couldn't touch a piano anymore. It hurt too much. So I took whatever work I could find to survive. And that's how I ended up here. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't shock at her talent. It was heartbreak for what she had lost, for the sacrifice she had made, for the brilliant career that had been stolen by circumstances beyond her control. Catherine Westmont stepped forward. her face wet with tears. She looked at her husband with an expression of pure disgust. "You tried to humiliate her," she said coldly. "You brought her up here to embarrass her in front of everyone, to make yourself feel big and important." Richard's face had gone pale. He looked around the room and saw only angry, disappointed faces staring back at him. The social tide had turned completely. He had thought he was setting up a harmless bit of entertainment at a servant's expense. Instead, he had revealed himself to be exactly what he was: cruel, petty, and small. I didn't know," he stammered, but his words fell flat. It didn't matter that he didn't know. He shouldn't have done it in the first place. A well-dressed man pushed through the crowd. This was Vincent Liu, a music producer who had worked with some of the biggest orchestras in the world. "Miss Martinez," he said urgently, "I want to help you record an album. I want the world to hear you play." "I'll fund whatever legal help you need," called out another guest, a wealthy philanthropist. "We'll get your visa situation sorted out." Mrs. Chen squeezed Elena's hands tighter. "And I'm calling every contact I have in the music world. You deserve to be on stage, not hidden away in a mansion. This is wrong, so very wrong." Offers and promises came flooding in from every direction. People wanted to help, wanted to be part of bringing Elena back to the world where she belonged. The maid who was supposed to be the evening's laughingstock had become its hero. The woman who was meant to be humiliated had instead revealed a beauty and talent that shamed them all for not seeing her before. Elena sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed and shaking. She had thought her dreams were dead and buried. She had accepted that life had taken them away forever, but now, impossibly, they were coming back to life, like flowers pushing through concrete, like light breaking through after the longest night. And in the corner of the room, Richard Westmont stood alone, realizing too late that his cruel joke had backfired in the worst possible way. The party that was supposed to celebrate Richard's generosity had turned into something completely different. Guests who barely noticed Elena an hour ago now surrounded her like she was the most important person in the room. Because suddenly she was. Mrs. Chen had already pulled out her phone and was making calls right there in the middle of the hall. "David, yes, it's me. You need to hear about this. Remember Elena Martinez, the prodigy who disappeared? I found her. Yes, I'm serious. She just played Rachmaninoff like I've never heard it played before. We need to do something. Tonight." Vincent Liu was scribbling notes on his phone, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We could record at Abbey Road or maybe Vienna, somewhere with perfect acoustics. This needs to be done right. This needs to be perfect." Elena sat on the piano bench, her hands still trembling. She felt like she was in a dream. The kind where everything you've ever wanted appears right in front of you, but you're afraid to reach out because it might all disappear the moment you touch it. People were throwing opportunities at her faster than she could process them. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. "Please," she said quietly, her voice getting lost in the excited chatter around her. "Please, I need a moment." Catherine heard her. She stepped forward and raised her hands. "Everyone, please. Give her some space. This is a lot to take in." The crowd reluctantly stepped back, though their eyes remained fixed on Elena with a mixture of admiration and guilt. Guilt that they had walked past her 1,000 times and never really seen her. Richard stood at the edge of the room, watching everything fall apart around him. Several of his closest business associates were whispering to each other, glancing at him with disapproval. His assistant was on her phone, no doubt already seeing the videos that were spreading across social media. His face appeared in several of them, frozen in that moment when he thought he was about to humiliate someone for fun. One of his business partners approached him, a tall man who had invested millions in Richard's company. "That was cruel, Richard. Really cruel. I expected better from you." "I didn't know she could play like that," Richard said defensively. "How was I supposed to know?" The man shook his head slowly. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't need to know anything about her to treat her with basic respect. You saw someone you thought was beneath you and decided to make her your entertainment. That says everything about who you are." The words hit harder than Richard wanted to admit. He watched as the man walked away, joining the crowd around Elena. More people were doing the same, turning their backs on him, choosing her side. He had been the king of this room an hour ago. Now he felt like an outsider at his own party. Catherine walked over to her husband, her face hard with an emotion he had rarely seen from her. Anger. Real, genuine anger. I hope you're proud of yourself, she said quietly, her voice cold enough to freeze water. Catherine, come on. It was just a joke that went wrong. I'll apologize. I'll make it right. Make it right. Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Richard, you can't make this right. You revealed exactly who you are tonight. Not just to everyone here, but to me. And I've been making excuses for you for too long. She pulled off her diamond bracelet, the one he had given her for their anniversary, and dropped it into his hand. I'll be staying at my sister's place tonight. My lawyer will contact you next week. Richard's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Over this, over some maid? The words came out before he could stop them, and they hung in the air like poison. Catherine's face went pale, then red with fury. You still don't get it. Even now, after everything, you still don't see her as a person. Just some maid. I can't do this anymore, Richard. I won't. She turned and walked away, stopping briefly to speak with Elena. Whatever she said made Elena nod and smile through her tears. Then Catherine left the party entirely, leaving Richard standing there alone with his expensive watch and his empty glass and his crumbling world. Across the room, Mrs. Chen had finished her calls and was beaming like she had just won the lottery. All right, dear, she said to Elena. I've spoken with the dean at the San Francisco Conservatory. They want to meet with you next week. And I have a friend who's an immigration lawyer, one of the best in the state. She's agreed to take your case pro bono. Pro bono? Elena asked, confused. For free, sweetheart. She'll help you sort out your visa situation without charging you a cent. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears. I don't understand. Why would she do that? Why are all of you helping me? You don't even know me. An older gentleman in a navy suit stepped forward. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted scrubbing floors. Because what happened to you was unfair. And because sometimes when life gives people a second chance, it's up to the rest of us to make sure they can actually take it. He introduced himself as Thomas Wayne, a retired symphony conductor who had spent 40 years leading orchestras around the world. I'd like to give you private lessons. Help you get back into form. You're brilliant, but you've been away from this world for a while. I can help you remember what you're capable of. Elena couldn't speak. She could only nod as more tears streamed down her face. These weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of hope, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion that came from watching impossible things become possible right before her eyes. Vincent pulled up a chair and sat down next to her. Let's talk seriously for a moment. I want to produce an album for you, but this needs to be done right. We're not rushing this. We're going to take our time, let you get back into practice, and then we're going to create something beautiful, something the world will remember. But the costs, Elena said. Recording an album, it must be so expensive. I can't afford it. You don't need to afford anything, Vincent interrupted gently. I have investors who would line up to fund this project once they hear you play. Trust me, this is going to happen. Mrs. Chen sat down on Elena's other side, taking her hand. I know this must feel overwhelming, like everything is happening too fast. But I want you to understand something important. You earned this. Not tonight, but years ago when you dedicated your life to music, when you practiced until your fingers bled, when you chose to be great at something. Tonight didn't make you talented. It just reminded everyone else that talent exists in places they weren't looking. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging her mascara. She didn't care. I gave up on this dream, she admitted. I thought it was gone forever. After my mother died, I couldn't even look at a piano without breaking down. I thought that part of my life was over. Dreams don't die that easily, Thomas said warmly. They just sleep sometimes, waiting for the right moment to wake up. And this is your moment, Vincent added. This is your second chance. The question is, are you ready to take it? Elena looked around at all these people who had been strangers an hour ago, and were now offering to change her life. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much to give her piano lessons as a child, who had believed in her even when they could barely afford food, who had told her right before she died that she was proud of her daughter no matter what happened. Mom, Elena whispered to herself, I think I get to play again. She looked up at the faces around her and smiled through her tears. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I'm ready. The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time Elena was standing. She wasn't the invisible maid anymore. She wasn't the girl Richard had tried to humiliate. She was Elena Martinez, pianist, and she was coming back. Across the room, Richard watched it all happen. He saw his wife leave. He saw his guests ignore him. He saw the video spreading online, his face frozen in that cruel smile that would now define him. He had tried to make someone feel small to make himself feel big. Instead, he had made her a star and revealed himself as the small one. His phone buzzed with a message from his publicist. "We need to talk. This is bad. Really bad." Richard looked down at the message and realized that in trying to have a laugh at someone else's expense, he had destroyed something he could never get back: his reputation, his marriage, the respect of everyone who mattered, all of it gone in one thoughtless moment. And the worst part was, he still didn't fully understand what he had done wrong. He just knew that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Westmont mansion, and the world had turned upside down. Not just for Elena, but for everyone involved in what people were now calling the piano moment that broke the internet. The video had gone viral beyond anyone's wildest imagination. 50 million views in the first week, then 100 million. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows wanted Elena as a guest. Musicians around the world were sharing the video, calling it one of the most powerful performances they had ever witnessed. The comments section was flooded with people sharing their own stories of lost dreams and second chances. But while the internet celebrated, Elena was living through the strangest and most intense weeks of her life. She had moved out of the tiny room at the back of the mansion where she used to sleep between shifts. Mrs. Chen had insisted she stay in the guest house on her estate, a small but beautiful cottage with tall windows and a garden full of roses. And most importantly, it had a piano. Elena spent hours at that piano every single day. Her fingers were sore at first, muscles remembering movements they hadn't made in years. But Thomas Wayne came by every afternoon for lessons, and slowly, steadily, she was finding her way back. It was like learning to speak your native language again after years of silence. "Your technique is still there," Thomas told her during one lesson, his fingers tapping along to her playing. "Buried, yes. Rusty, absolutely. But it's there. We just need to polish it, bring it back to the surface. You're doing beautifully." Elena still couldn't believe this was her life now. Sometimes she would wake up in the morning and panic, thinking she was late for work at the mansion. Then she would remember. She wasn't a maid anymore. She was a pianist again. The words felt strange even in her own mind. The immigration lawyer Mrs. Chen recommended, a sharp woman named Patricia, who wore power suits and took no nonsense from anyone, had taken Elena's case and was working miracles. "Your situation isn't as complicated as you think," Patricia had explained during their first meeting. "You were here legally on a student visa. Life circumstances forced you to leave school. We can work with this. Give me 2 months and I'll have this sorted out." 2 months. Elena could wait 2 months. She had already waited years. Vincent Liu called her almost every other day with updates about the album. He had assembled a dream team of producers, sound engineers, and musicians. "We're thinking a mix of classical pieces and some contemporary works," he explained during one call. "Show your range. Show what you can do. The world needs to hear all of you, not just one performance." But it wasn't all good news and second chances. The internet had also turned its attention to Richard Westmont, and what it found wasn't pretty. People dug up old interviews where he had made dismissive comments about his staff. Former employees came forward with stories of how he treated them. Business ethics bloggers questioned his company's practices. The narrative that formed was clear and damning. Here was a wealthy man who thought his money gave him the right to humiliate others for sport. Richard's company stock had dropped 15%. 3 major investors had pulled out, releasing statements about not wanting to be associated with someone who showed such poor character. His social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Every day brought new consequences for those few minutes of cruelty. He had tried to apologize, of course. A public statement released through his publicist expressed regret for his poor judgment and wished Elena well in her future endeavors. But the apology felt hollow, written by lawyers and PR professionals, and the internet saw right through it. You couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You couldn't unsay words or undo actions once they were captured on video and shared with the world. Catherine had followed through with the divorce. She wasn't just leaving him. She was taking half of everything and using her portion to fund arts education for underprivileged children. I spent 20 years watching my husband look down on people who had less than him, she said in an interview with a major magazine. I'm done being complicit in that. I'm done pretending wealth makes someone better than anyone else. The interview had made headlines. People praised her courage. Some called her a hero for standing up to her husband. Catherine didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who should have done this years ago. She had reached out to Elena a few days after the party, inviting her for coffee. They met at a quiet cafe far from cameras and crowds. Catherine looked different without all the makeup and jewelry. Younger somehow, more real. I'm sorry, Catherine had said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. I'm sorry I didn't stop him sooner. I'm sorry I stood there and watched him treat you that way. I'm sorry for every time over the years when I saw him be cruel to someone and said nothing. Elena had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You're stopping him now. That takes courage. I wish I had your grace, Catherine said with a sad smile. You could hate all of us. You'd have every right to. But you don't, do you? Hate takes too much energy, Elena replied. And I need all my energy for playing piano right now. They had laughed together and it felt good. Like two people finding unexpected friendship in the ruins of something terrible. Now, 3 weeks later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her cottage, trying on the dress Mrs. Chen had bought for her. It was deep blue, elegant but not too fancy. Tomorrow was her first public performance since the video went viral. Not a huge concert, just a small recital at the conservatory. A chance to play for people who wanted to hear her music, not her story. She was terrified. What if she messed up? What if the video was a fluke? And tomorrow everyone would realize she wasn't as good as they thought. What if her fingers froze? What if she disappointed all these people who had invested so much faith in her? There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Chen poked her head in, her eyes lighting up when she saw Elena in the dress. Oh, darling, you look perfect. I feel like I'm going to throw up, Elena admitted. Mrs. Chen laughed and came inside, sitting on the edge of the bed. That's normal. Every great performer I've ever known gets nervous before they play. The fear means you care. It means it matters to you. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? Then you fail, Mrs. Chen said simply. And then you get up and try again. That's how this works. But Elena, you need to understand something. You've already succeeded. You survived when life tried to break you. You kept going when you had every reason to quit. You sacrificed everything for your mother, and when you finally got a chance to play again, even when someone tried to humiliate you, you showed the world what you're made of. Tomorrow's performance? That's just the next step, not the only step. Elena sat down next to her, feeling tears prick her eyes. Again, she cried so much these days, but they were different tears now, not grief or pain or exhaustion. These were tears of gratitude and fear and hope all mixed together. My mother would have loved this, Elena said softly. She would have been so proud. She is proud, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Wherever she is, she's watching and she's proud of you. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset through the window. Elena thought about tomorrow, about the people who would be there, about the piano waiting for her on stage, about all the tomorrows that would come after that. She thought about Richard too sometimes. Not with anger, but with something close to pity. He had everything, money, success, power, and he was miserable. She had lost almost everything, and she was finding joy again. There was a lesson in that somewhere. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. Recording studio is booked for next month. Abbey Road, we're really doing this. Get ready to make history. Elena smiled and typed back a simple response. I'm ready. And for the first time in years, she actually believed it. She was ready. Ready to play. Ready to dream. Ready to become who she was always meant to be before life got in the way. The maid who everyone had overlooked was about to step into the spotlight. And this time she wasn't going to be invisible anymore. This time the whole world was going to see her. Really see her. Not as someone's servant or someone's joke, but as Elena Martinez, the pianist who refused to let her dream stay buried. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Carnegie Hall. The words still didn't feel real in her mind. This was the stage where legends performed, where history was made, and tonight she was going to walk out onto that stage and play. Her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, though there was plenty of that too. They were shaking from excitement, from disbelief. from the overwhelming reality of how much her life had changed in such a short time. The small recital at the conservatory had gone beautifully. Then there was another performance, and another. Word spread quickly. Critics who came expecting to see an internet sensation discovered a genuine artist instead. Her recordings started circulating in classical music circles. Vincent's album project gained momentum, and then the call came. Carnegie Hall wanted her for a solo recital. Elena wore a stunning gown that Catherine had insisted on buying for her. It was midnight blue with delicate beading that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was styled elegantly, and for once she actually felt beautiful. Not like a maid pretending to be something she wasn't, but like herself, her true self. 5 minutes, Miss Martinez, a stage manager said, poking his head into the dressing room. Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Behind her reflection, she could see her mother's photograph propped up on the dressing table. She had brought it with her, needed it with her, a reminder of why she was here, why any of this mattered. "I'm doing it, Mama," she whispered to the photo. "I'm really doing it." There was a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Chen stepped inside, looking elegant in a silver gown. Behind her came Catherine, Thomas, Vincent, and Patricia the lawyer. They had all flown in from California to be here for this moment. Her team, her family now. "How are you feeling?" Catherine asked, though the answer was written all over Elena's face. Terrified, excited, like I might pass out or fly or both at the same time. Elena laughed nervously. Thomas stepped forward and put his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me. You've practiced every piece 100 times. You know this music like you know your own heartbeat. When you get out there, don't think about the audience. Don't think about the cameras or the critics or the pressure. Just think about the music. Let it flow through you the way it always has. That's all you need to do." Vincent pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "Do you see this? The live stream has already started. 200,000 people are waiting to watch you perform. This isn't just about tonight. You're inspiring people all over the world. People who gave up on their dreams. People who think it's too late for second chances. You're showing them it's not." Elena felt tears threatening to ruin her makeup, but she didn't care. These people had saved her life. They had taken a maid crying at a piano and given her back her future. How could she ever thank them enough? "Places, Miss Martinez," the stage manager called. This was it. The moment everything changed or everything fell apart. Elena took a deep breath, smoothed down her gown, and walked toward the stage entrance. Her team followed her into the wings, their presence a comfort even though they couldn't go any further with her. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Carnegie Hall stage pianist Elena Martinez." The applause was immediate and thunderous. Elena stepped out onto the stage and the lights hit her like a wave of warmth. The hall was packed. Every single seat filled, people standing in the back. She could see faces in the front rows, all watching her with anticipation and hope. She walked to the piano, her legs somehow carrying her even though she felt like she might collapse. The beautiful black grand piano sat there waiting, spotlights making it shine. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and looked out at the sea of faces one more time. And then she saw him, Richard Westmont, sitting in the back row, partially hidden in shadow. He looked different, smaller somehow. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he looked tired, defeated. Their eyes met for just a second, and Elena saw something there she didn't expect. Regret. Real, genuine regret. She didn't know why he had come, maybe to see what he had almost destroyed. Maybe to understand what he had missed when he looked at her and saw only a servant. Maybe just to witness the consequence of his cruelty, transformed into something beautiful. Whatever the reason, Elena felt no anger toward him anymore, only a strange sort of peace. She turned back to the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. The concert hall fell silent, 2,000 people holding their breath. Hundreds of thousands more watching online, all waiting for her to begin. Elena thought about her journey. The little girl taking her first piano lesson. The teenager winning competitions. The daughter leaving school to save her mother. The maid scrubbing floors and serving champagne. The woman who thought her dreams were dead. And finally, this moment. All of it had led here. She began to play. The first piece was Chopin, the composer she had won her first major competition with all those years ago. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence now. No hesitation, no fear. The music poured out of her like water from a fountain, pure and clear and absolutely perfect. The audience was mesmerized. She could feel it even with her eyes closed. The way they leaned forward in their seats. The way the energy in the room shifted and focused entirely on the sound she was creating. This was why she had been born. This was what she was meant to do. Not scrub floors or serve drinks. This, music, beauty, connection. She moved from Chopin to Beethoven, then to Rachmaninoff. The same piece she had played that night at the mansion, but different now. Not filled with pain and grief, but with triumph and joy. She played like someone who had died and come back to life, because in a way she had. Between pieces, the applause was deafening. People stood up, shouting their appreciation. Critics were already typing on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something special. Something they would talk about for years. For her final piece, Elena had chosen something unexpected. A contemporary composition by a young composer from Mexico, her mother's homeland. It was a piece about immigration, about sacrifice, about mothers and daughters and the dreams we carry across borders. As she played it, tears streamed down her face, but her fingers never wavered. When the final note faded into silence, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the entire hall erupted. People were on their feet, applauding, crying, shouting. The standing ovation went on for 10 minutes, then 15. People didn't want to stop, didn't want the moment to end. Elena stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She looked to the wings where her friends stood, all of them crying with pride. She looked up toward the ceiling, toward heaven, knowing her mother was somewhere watching, and she looked back toward where Richard had been sitting, but his seat was empty now. He had already left, slipping away into the night. She didn't know what happened to Richard after that. Heard rumors that he had sold his company and moved away, that he was trying to rebuild his life somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think about who he wanted to be instead of who he had been. Elena hoped he found what he was looking for. She hoped he learned what she had learned, that how we treat people when we think nobody's watching reveals our true character. The album came out 2 months after the Carnegie Hall performance and debuted at #1 on the classical charts. Elena went on a world tour, playing in concert halls across Europe, Asia, and South America. She started a foundation to help young musicians from immigrant families afford music education. She gave master classes and inspired a new generation of pianists. But more than any of that, she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she hadn't been since before her mother got sick. She woke up every morning grateful. Grateful for the music. Grateful for the second chance. Grateful even for that night at the mansion, as awful as it had been, because it had been the catalyst for everything that came after. Catherine became one of her closest friends. They met for coffee once a month, talking about life and dreams and the strange ways the universe works. Mrs. Chen remained her mentor and biggest champion, introducing her to everyone who mattered in the classical music world. Thomas continued to give her lessons even though he told her she had surpassed him long ago. Vincent produced 3 more albums with her, each one more successful than the last. Years later, when people asked Elena about that night at the mansion, she always said the same thing. It wasn't the night that changed my life. My life changed because of everyone who saw me differently after that night, who saw my worth when I had almost forgotten it myself. Richard Westman tried to make me small, but instead he accidentally showed the world how big I could be. I don't thank him for his cruelty, but I'm grateful for what came after. The maid who was supposed to be a joke had become a legend. The woman who was invisible had become unforgettable. And somewhere in a small apartment in Mexico, a young girl practiced piano after school, dreaming of stages and spotlights, inspired by the story of Elena Martinez. The story of the woman who proved that talent and worth exist everywhere in everyone, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for a chance. And when that chance comes, when that moment arrives where the world finally sees you, you have to be ready to take it, ready to play, ready to shine, ready to show them who you really are. Elena had been ready, and she had changed everything.